Hello, everyone. Well, my name is Mike Frangi, a.k.a. Doc, and I'm a principal character artist working at Quantic Dream right now. Previously, I've worked for like 6 years, and I've worked like at Ubisoft Bordeaux on games like Assassin's Creed Mirage, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, Ghost Recon Breakpoint, but we don't talk about this one. And before that, I was a character artist on at Pretty Simple Game, which was like a gaming company, mobile game company in Paris. So for today, I will show you how to get from basically nothing to a 3D printable creature or character inside Zbrush. Um, and yeah, with some tips and tricks on how to achieve some of the elements on set characters. And for this talk, I will use one of my recent project as reference, which is the Ammut. And as the title says, I'll be mostly working inside Zbrush. So let's talk first about briefing and research. So you are in front of your PC. Zbrush is open and your stylus is literally shaking between your fingers. Now what? Well, first of all, we're going to need a concept or an idea, a prompt, or whatever subject to get us started. You might already have some, I don't know, like some 2D concepts given to you by a client or found something interesting while browsing ArtStation. But in any case, we'll have to research the character we're working on. So you might have like on the left, like a full concept or maybe just a sketch, an idea, which is like not as advanced as the other one. Or maybe just, I don't know, you want to do like a cursed dragon or a vampire knight or whatever like you want to work on. But Doc, I already have a concept art. Surely I have all I need, right? Wrong. Why you're wrong? Because you cannot like only use a concept art. You still need references, whether it's of all the different elements on your characters, anatomy sheets of humans or animals in my case, because it's clearly an animal. Some inspiration mood images, and also the level of quality you're trying to achieve, especially if you're working for a certain company that already has an established style. So this is like some assets I researched, like Egyptian assets, because the Ammut is like a Egyptian goddess. Some animals anatomy, some mood inspiration, and finally, like I said, the quality I would like to achieve. And this little photo bashing I made just to know how to to work on that character. But Doc, you magnificent lush-haired and handsome devil, what if I don't have a concept to work on? You may ask. You're in luck, because you'll be able to express your endless creativity and show the world how much of a badass you are. But you will need a lot of research and references because you're basing your sculpt on literally nothing. In that case, I recommend browsing ArtStation, Pinterest, Google, or any other like website you generally use for inspiration, and just fill a mood board with some design that catch your eye. Uh, what I usually do is then I pick and choose element in different concept that I like. For example, I like the wings on that dragon. I like the horns on this animal, and then you can like make mix and match them. And if you're comfortable doing 2D, you can always sketch your own version of the character, like how you imagined it, depending on the references you got. Oops, sorry. So for this concept, I had for this project, sorry, I had a concept that was made by I think his family name is Fernandez, but for some reason he put FDEZ. And the company was One Page Rule. And all the mood board and all the references I gathered were like um, mostly animal references, uh, like a lion, a crocodile head, and the back of the hippo, as well as, like I said, the other references from the previous project, just to match the style. So step one, posing. So this is one quick step I want to address before tackling the blockout part itself. If you already have a specific pose in mind for your miniature, or if you were already given like one alongside the concept by the client, then great, you can proceed to the blockout phase. But if you don't have any concept or anything, you know, like no idea about how like you want to make your project, I recommend making a really quick and rough blockout of your miniature and try different poses before starting the real work. The idea is to find something appealing from all angles while the sculpt is still bare minimum, because later it will be harder to do when you are like juggling with 100+ subtools and millions of points inside ZBrush. Also, that can help you like anticipate the sculpting phase and sculpt the miniature in a pose that fits as much as possible the pose instead of you know, the classic neutral pose, and thereby you will avoid a lot of stretching when doing the final pose. So now for the real blocking part. First of all, knowing the scale of your miniature is an important step that shouldn't be overlooked, as you wouldn't work on in the same way if you were working on a 32 millimeter or a 300 millimeter like big creature like the one we have now. For example, if you are working on a 32 millimeter scale, you would go for like more broader shapes, less details, and focus more on primary and, if necessary, secondary shapes. If you're working on a bigger creature like the one we are discussing now, you can go nuts on the details. So you can go in all the tertiary shapes, and if you want to add some skin details like pores and wrinkles and stuff like that, you can go for it, because usually people like to print them really big. So it's always nice to have that extra detail when you're gonna like print your miniature. Um, Before jumping on the blockout, I recommend creating a box that basically has the size of your character. That way you will know exactly how much your model is big inside ZBrush, and it will basically act as a visual reference of the desired scale. That way you will be working from the start on correct proportion and on the right scale. And if you need to export it between like software, Maya, Blender, Max, whatever, it will be like in the correct scale. So you will avoid like bad surprises after that. So this is as an example of what I was talking, like the differences between a 32 millimeter figure on the left and 100+ millimeter figure on the right. You can see that on the left, some of the elements on the armor are like just plain and bigger, like more exaggerated and just smooth in some areas. Because if you try to print it as a 32 millimeter figure, all the detail will be washed out. Whereas if you try to print the other one, you will see more of the detail, so it's worth it to put more detail in that case. Um, so the blockout for real now. Why do we need a blockout? The blockout is to have a feel of the silhouette and the shape of the character and how all the elements work between each other. You can check your blockout with different references and the concept if you have one. And usually what I do to block out stuff, I just start creating spheres and put them and move them, scale them, do some rough sculpting, not going to too many details, because at this point we don't need too much details. We don't want to work on the global aspect of the character. I recommend using like Dynamesh with a low resolution to do this, so you can update constantly your mesh and not worry about like going too much into detail. Another thing I recommend is if you have a production board like the one that was given to me on the concept, like sides, front, and maybe a back side, you can put it in PureRef and put your PureRef behind ZBrush. And ZBrush has a neat like slider that you can use to make ZBrush transparent. So you will see what happens behind your ZBrush basically. And you could align your mesh with the 2D concept to try to match all the elements and the different stuff. So it's just a quality of life stuff. So after I was done with the body, hair, and small elements like teeth, uh, the teeth, the all the dangling stuff on his chin and the belts, I started adding the armor pieces. Usually, what I do is just masking the body and extracting the shape. So it's just to have an idea of the placement of all the elements. So now the real fun begins. Some general tips about sculpting. You always have to keep in mind the time, the deadline you have, all the time that you would need to make the elements. Like I said before, the difference between a 32 and 100 plus millimeter scale miniature. So if you think you're making a small miniature, don't go too much overboard with the details because either way they won't be visible on the print later on. So try to balance how much details you want to show on this character versus how much it will actually be shown when you are like printing the model. Another aspect that is super important when you're making characters for 3D printing, the meshes should be watertight. What does that mean? It means that if you had some metaphorical water, like going over the mesh, it shouldn't be able to get inside the model and it should like always stay on the surface of the model. If you have gaps or holes inside the model, it could create sometimes big problem during the printing. So we would need to avoid that. So always make sure that, and I'll be talking about it just a bit later. Always make sure that your meshes have like a thickness or are full. Like no open meshes should be on your sculpt. Another thing that is important, but not it's not really a blocker. It's more like if you make meshes that are too thin, like feathers, blades, spikes, I don't know. If you make them too thin, they might break on the final sculpt. So always try to make them bulkier than usual. And that also is something that you see a lot on 3D printed characters. You can see that the details are a bit exaggerated, like bigger hand, bigger face, bigger armors, and it's also for that reason. So finally, the most important aspect is avoid having open meshes at all costs. Like all your meshes should have a thickness or should be full. In case you think you have like a Dynamesh, sorry, in case you think you have like an open mesh, you could use Dynamesh to fill it. But you always have to avoid this because it could break your skull basically when you 3D print it. So now onto like some of the brushes I usually use to do my sculpts. Uh, these are fairly basic brushes that you can find inside ZBrush. So clay buildup, standard, move, and dem standard are usually my main brushes to add or take away mass from my subtool. And as a side note, you should know that clay buildup is always superior to clay tubes in every single way. Don't at me clay tube users, please. Apart from that, I like to use like Trim Dynamic, H-Polish, Mallet Fast 2, and trim smooth border that are great to do like some damages or to flatten areas like metal or maybe, I don't know, rocks, but I never do rocks, so how should I know? Some of them are hidden inside the ZBrush folder, but are native to ZBrush. So you can go in the light box and go inside brushes, and you can easily find them. Other brushes like Orb Cracks 2 and /2 Pinch and Z Modeler are also great. Orb Cracks 2 are brushes that you can find online. They're pretty famous. They're made by, if I'm not mispronouncing, Michael Vicente, I think his name is. And they're free, so grab them because they're pretty great. So it's time to refine the shape. So I started working on the anatomy by starting with the primary shapes. And at that point, I was using a lot of my references and the anatomy images I gathered of all like the animals. The idea here is like to make a believable character and to make like believable transitions, because basically the Ammut is made of three animals: the head of a crocodile, the front part of a lion, and the back part of a hippo. So these animals are like don't share the same kind of anatomy. So it's also important to make sure that they work together. At that point, when I have enough, like I'm happy with all the shapes and all the stuff I've done, I switched from Dynamesh to subdivision levels. And this will be important later on, and we'll get back to this later. But for now, I basically move stuff around, sculpt anatomy, and sculpt my muscle groups. And basically the brush I usually used are Move, Clay Build-Up, Dem Standard for my main brushes, like to add or subtract mass. And for everything like details, I use Orb Cracks 2/2, Dem Standard, and that kind of stuff. Oops. Another thing that is super useful when working on 3D printed meshes, since it's not like for real time or for films, you should separate your meshes as much as you can, like the arms and the leg from the torso, the head, the tail, I don't know, some armor pieces and stuff like that. That way it will be like more comfortable for you to work with, because you can easily hide them or show them or move them around. And at the same time, you will be able to add subdivision level on each of these parts individually. So you will be able to crank up the subdivision level if you think you need more details or more. So yeah, basically more details. So this is how the body looked after I was done with the sculpting. So I tried working with basically with the anatomy references a lot. And at the same time, I was looking at the concept, because basically the Ammut is a bit bulkier than a normal animal, I would say. So the front legs of the lion were made a bit thicker than usual, and the head is basically bigger and has like more elements, more teeth, more horns, more stuff like that. These are some close-ups on the different elements. I will talk about the how I made the scales and all that stuff just after that. So basically right now, for the scales and the smaller like details on the scale, I used three different techniques. The first one was to make all the scales that are like repetitive on the how's it called, the tail. I used a technique called Alpha 3D, and I used it a lot for everything like small details that need to push or kind of subtract geometry. But basically, what Alpha 3D meshes do is that they will store a 3D shape and use it like to deform your topology when applying a stroke. So each time you're gonna sculpt on your mesh, um, the brush is going to take some of that topology and push it out or push it in, and it's super easy like to make repetitive detail like scales. And the only caveat for this technique is that you need enough resolution to avoid blurriness and lack of details. So that's also where the subdivision level workflow ties in, because if you need more definition on your scale, you could just add one subdivision level and you should be fine. I can do a small demo of how the Alpha 3D brushes work, but I think I'll do it at the end. So if we don't have time, so basically I can go through my presentation and then show you. The other technique I use for the scales, this time on the body for the small transition between the bigger scales and the body. I used basically not the dam standard, the standard brush with a drag rectangle modifier on it, and I put some alpha. So the first one, the alpha 60, is a default brush that kind of mimics leather textures. And the other one is a frog skin alpha that I found on the internet. And basically what you do is like just dragging your alpha on the body, and you can use this in combination with layers to control how much like details you want, or maybe you want like more to make it like more present here, or maybe less detail, but you just want to see it slightly. And lastly, for the face, I used a more classic approach for the scales, because I noticed that the scales on the head of a crocodile are a bit chaotic than the tail that is like super organized and neatly placed, I would say. So on the face, I used like a classic workflow, I would say, for making the scales. Uh, just defining the shapes with the dam standard, like just carving the shape of the scales and then giving them a bit of thickness with the clay buildup. And then I added like a final pass of what I was talking about with the standard and the frog skin. I just added a layer of that on top of it just to break it up a little and put more damage and stuff like that. So that was for the scales. For the hair, I actually used a brush that I bought online, and it's super useful. It's called Stylized Hair Brush Pack by Hongshan Lim. He's an artist working at Blizzard, as far as I know. And basically, it's an EMM brush, which is basically how to say it, like a brush that will follow a curve, and it will apply like a shape alongside this curve. So it's super easy like to draw a curve and give it a shape and give it a flow, and it will like taper the mesh on the end. So it will give it like this pointy aspect while keeping like a thick base on it. What I try to do is giving like a lion mane aspect to my basically to my hair, because basically the front part of the Ammut is a lion, so I try to mimic this. The only problem with this EMM brush is that if you put like layers and layers of hair on top of each other, at some point it will create like some gaps between the meshes. And if you remembered earlier, if you have like some gaps or hollow parts inside the mesh, it could like create some problems for the printing process. So what I recommend is just putting like a filler mesh just underneath the hair to fill these gaps and avoid having this problem later on. Um, if like me, you hate Marvel's Designer, but need to do some basic class simulation for your project, I basically have great news for you. There are some basic class simulation brushes inside ZBrush, and they are great to make quick folds without having to bother getting out of ZBrush basically. And I don't know if you're like me, but usually when I try to use Marvelous Designer, I end up like booting Marvelous and watching 10 hours of tutorial in order to do something. So it's not something I'm fond of basically. So yeah, ZBrush has these brushes and you can find them inside the brush palette. There are a few of them and you should just look for the suffix cloth at the end. There is also like a class simulation inside ZBrush, like a proper one, like Marvel's, but I never managed to make it work, but it's a bit overkill, so I don't really need it. So usually what I do is I just make the make the bandage or my cloth part or the belt, and I start sculpting like just basic fold, just so it's not like flat on all sides. And then I select the transpose cloth brush, and basically what it will do is it will apply a simulation on your bandage in the direction that you are like scaling or moving it. And if you are using subdivision levels and you are on the lower subdivision levels, it will make bigger folds than if you are on the like on the last level of the subdivision. And the more higher subdivision is and the smaller the folds are, sorry. So I usually recommend staying on the first one or two subdivision levels to make these folds, because otherwise it's a bit overkill. Then what I like to do is just go after and sculpt and polish, do some damage on the cloth basically. Another pro tip I like to talk about when making bandages or something that is like super close to the body. Instead of like using the classic masking, extracting, or I don't know, making a retopo of the object and basically making a shell out of it, like with the panel loop or with an extruder, whatever. I like to use the cylinder primitive inside ZBrush, like the one that you basically can find in ZBrush, because basically the result will be the same, but it will avoid you like the same problem as the hair, with having like gaps between the geometry and I mean between your bandage and the body. And since you're only going to see like I would the visible part of the bandage, it won't matter anyway, and it will like save you some time and some troubles later on. So I'd rather use this than the rest. For the other cloth elements on the body, I basically masked out and made sure that when I did the extrude on my object, it was like intersecting with the body of the Ammut, just to avoid having these kind of problems. For the armor, I used either poly modeling directly inside ZBrush. Um, I use usually ZModeler. I kind of like how ZModeler works. Like you have all the option just at the tip of your stylus. So, or maybe I can sometimes when the shape is a bit complex, I like to go outside ZBrush in Maya, or you can do it in Blender or Max. Because let's be honest, ZBrush can be clunky sometimes, but to be honest, it adds to its charm, you know. Basically use whatever is easier to you. The idea is to have like clean topology with some nice loops, like edge loops that you can extract bevel crease when you need it to get the intended shape. I used Trim Dynamic, Trim Smooth Border, H Polish, and Malice Fast 2 to do some damage, to do some wear and tear on the on the uh, on the armor parts. And I also used some Orb Slash. I put Orb Slash too, but it's not only this one. Like he has multiple ones, and basically they do like scratches and just dents on the armor. On top of that, I used like some noise generator just to give it a bit of like rust or stuff like that. It's not too strong because it won't be seen. It won't be seen anyway. So you can see on these like on these shields some of the detail that I put. So when I wanted to do some damages on the edges, it was mostly like trim smooth border and mallet fast. When I needed to do scratches, it's basically the orb brushes, like orb slash 1, 2, 3, and 4. The small dots that you can see, probably, I hope the quality is fine. The small dots were basically the standard brush with a drag rectangle modifier and just dots on it, just to give it like the rusty aspect and stuff like that. The hieroglyph were done the same way I actually did the scales on the tail. So basically, I made all these brushes as an Alpha 3D brush, and I just dragged them on the mesh to draw them basically. Like all previous assets, make sure you don't leave any gaps between the armor pieces and the body, because gaps are super bad for printing and we don't want them. Basically we're done. Oh no, there is more actually. So now it's posing part 2, electric boogaloo, but this one is the more interesting part because basically part 1 was just making a proxy mesh, I would say, like a blockout mesh of your sculpt, just to try to find a nice pose to put him in. But right now we are going to really pose our mesh. So you remember I told you about the subdivision levels earlier. I hope you have them now because honestly they're gonna become super handy for the pose, as we're going to use the transpose master tool to pose our big boy. So transpose master is a tool that you can find natively inside ZBrush, and it's inside the Z plugin menu. And basically what it does, it merges all visible subtools into one mesh with all like the polygroup and all that stuff. And it does it at the lowest subdivision level available for each one of these mesh. So if you have like an object, like a subtool that has 5 subdivision levels, it will go like on the first one. But if you have an object that has no subdivision level, but it's still like, I don't know, 2 million poly high, it will use this mesh. So I recommend using the subdivision level workflow for this because it will be faster. It will be easier to pose when you will do it, because let's be honest, if you are trying to pose Dynamesh like part of the body and it's like, I don't know, 2 million points, it's not gonna like move as good as if you had it on the subdivision level 1, and then you can take like bigger chunks of polygon and just move them and then tweak on the higher subdivision levels. So the idea with the blockout is to try to match your 2D concept, like the one that was given to me by the company, or the 3D blockout that you made in posing part 1, not electric boogaloo, but the first one, you know. Um, I recommend like looking the model, like looking at the model from all the angles possible, and to try having like nice shapes and curves when you are posing it. Uh, because basically, contrary to like when you're doing a 2D concept or like a 2D, even a 3D project that you post online on ArtStation, sometimes you don't show all the angles and you show like the angle that you want people to see. But here right now, since it's like a printable character, people are gonna print it and they're gonna like see it from all angles, and it's always nice like to have something that is appealing from every side of it. Since you move some stuff around and maybe I don't know, there there had there has been some problems on your mesh, or maybe some deformation that you didn't like intend for to happen, you will probably have to retake and clean some areas. So you can either go back into Dynamesh to clean that up and just sculpt back some areas like some muscles or some I don't know, some stuff that was that needs to be smoothed out. Or you could use Sculptress Pro, which is basically the same thing except you don't have like to go back in Dynamesh. And at this point, if your sculpt requires a base to stand on, for example, the Ammut has like is hanging on some pillars. It's like standing on some I don't know statues, and there's a pillar in its hand. If you need like a visual reference, usually what I do is just grab some cubes and cylinders or whatever like I have in ZBrush and try to make like a proxy scene just to match the pose, and then we'll work on the base later. It's not super important at this stage. So on the left, you can see the initial 2D concept that was given to me, and on the right, the final look of the 3D posed Ammut. Some elements were changed, like for example the pillar that the Ammut is like standing next to. It was like too Greek, basically, and the Ammut was like an Egyptian goddess. So we changed it into an obelisk instead. And some elements were added, like some of the vases, some elements were tweaked. It's not super important, but uh, do expect some changes from the initial concept art and until the final thing. Uh, at this point, I didn't put the priest on it. The priest I treated as a separate project, I would say, so I didn't include it in this presentation, but basically works the same. So now, um, I know that EXP has a lot of environment artists, so you're all gonna be happy with this step because it's basically working on the base. I'm just kidding. I just use Megascans. To be honest, I don't like working on environments, and I ain't sculpting rocks if I don't have to. So basically, what I like to do is just go on the Quixel Megascan thing and try to find some nice elements to play with and to make my base basically. The only problem with Megascans is that sometimes the meshes are like open and sometimes quite heavy. Like sometimes the mesh is like 16 million points, and I'm like, why? You can decimate it and it just keeps like the same amount of detail. It's nuts. But I mean, be sure like to fill this mesh before like the final export, because you know it's gonna create problems later on. So dynamesh it, or just close all holes just to be sure you won't have a problem. And just have fun with it. Basically what I do is just combining element, merging, reworking others. Like sometimes I like to add more damage or more details on even rocks. Can you believe it? I'm working on rocks. But I don't try like to take too much time on the base, because basically the the important part of the project is the character, and the base is just like a support for it to stand on. So it's not taking most of my time. So maybe if you want to focus more on the character, just don't overdo the base. Sometimes simple base can work great for some characters. Like, if I'm not mistaken, I didn't do any base for the skeleton, like the mummy priest that is standing on the crocodile, because first of all, the client didn't want it. They want like a normal cylinder to stand up on. And I mean, it's not really worth it. It's nice when you do it for bigger creature, because then you can notice it, and I mean, you can have fun with it, and people will see it actually. So finally, this is a super important step that shouldn't also be overlooked, because now that our model is finished and posed, we still have to prep it for export before the printing. And if you have been following so far, you shouldn't have like holes or gaps inside the model. But even if you like followed every step along the way and made sure that there is no hole or whatever, it's always nice like to do like just a check and do a final cleanup, just in case, you never know. So a neat technique I like to use to get rid of holes. So there are two techniques. There is the Dynamesh, which is like the good old trusty Dynamesh. We could basically merge everything together and use Dynamesh on our model to make sure there are no holes inside it. But the thing I don't like with Dynamesh is that it's super reliant on the object size. So basically, if the the Dynamesh like casts like a square or a box, if I remember correctly, around the mesh, and if the mesh fits inside that square, then great. It will do like the normal, the maximal Dynamesh resolution inside it. But if the mesh goes a little bit outside this box, then the Dynamesh will use like two boxes, and then the Dynamesh resolution will be like divided basically. So it's heavily reliant on the object size, and what I don't like is if you did like some how to say it, some custom topology or stuff like that, it will completely destroy it, and it will completely destroy details as well if basically the object is like too big compared to that box. What I like to use is the remesh by union, and basically it has none of these problems. But the only maybe caveat is that it's a bit hidden. So where you can find it if you go into translate or rotate, the maybe basically transform mode, sorry, inside Zbrush. And you just have to click on the little gear, and you can see it on the right. It's remesh by union. So what will remesh by union do? It will merge all subtools together into one watertight model by looking where all the objects intersect, and it will remove any interior surfaces. So basically the Chad remesh by union compared to, I won't say it like Dynamesh. It merges everything together, it removes everything inside, and the mesh becomes watertight, and then everybody loves you, you're successful in life, and yeah, whatever. The steps to do it. So basically, we will take our initial mesh. We will do the remesh by union on the first one, and then we will duplicate this model, and we will basically make this model our filling. That way we will fill all the gaps and all the holes inside the model. So we will dynamesh this other mesh, like the filling mesh, and we can put like a mid-level dynamesh level on it, like resolution, so it doesn't lose too much details, but at the same time, it's not like super, super detailed, and we can like move stuff easily if we need to. Then this mesh, we will like deflate it with the inflate slider with negative value. And we will deflate it enough so that it's like hidden by the first mesh, like the one we used remesh by union on. That way, when we will like Boolean merge the two meshes in the next steps, they will fill all the gaps. And since the two models are like super close together, you won't see the inside mesh, but the model will be like filled 100%. And of course, before doing this, you can polish if you notice that there are still like some gaps remaining on the filling mesh. You can like smooth them out. You can use Dynamesh again, or you could use Sculptress Pro, which basically does the same thing as Dynamesh, but a bit faster, I guess, and a bit more I don't know, flexible. So this process is longer than just merging everything and dynameshing it, but usually it yields better results. So this is the final look of the Ammut. This time I have the priest standing on him, like so proud. There is another step I could talk about, but I'm not actually super comfortable talking about it, is like cutting the model, because if the model is too big for so hold on. Usually 3D printers have a defined printing area, and depending on the model, it can vary in size. So if you have like a small model which is 32 millimeters, it can completely fit usually inside that area. But for bigger creatures like this one, you need to cut it before exporting it. And basically cutting it is a mix between booleans and just making everything fit inside one box that would be like the size of the printing like the 3D printing box. To be honest, I'm not super comfortable talking about it because I haven't done it so much, so I won't like go on it too much. But if you have some question, I might be able to answer them. And basically that concludes my presentation. Just apologies for if some areas are a bit like void of any images. I basically had to rush some of the stuff, so yeah, basically I'm done. What shampoo and conditioner do you use? I use Head and Shoulders. I really like Head and Shoulders. Do you need to be mindful of the fact with 3D prints, there are no texture like normal maps to add very fine detail? Do you use anything like tiling, displacement maps to save you some time on the really micro stuff by Cairo? So, to be honest, I'm not really mindful, I would say, about this, because since I usually do characters for games as well, it's like the same process when you are working on a high poly of a character. And for example, if you're working on a realistic character and you want to do all the skin details and all the pores and all that stuff, you will still do them inside Zbrush. So it's not something that you really need to worry about at that point. But for like the micro stuff, you can use the noise. How's it called? The noise thing inside ZBrush. There's like a. Can you still see my screen? Okay. If you go to surface, you can use the surface noise. And oh shit, I didn't know I had that thing opened. There you go. You can still add, I mean, it's super procedural stuff, but you can add your own alpha and your own tileable textures, I would say, if you need like to add micro details. The thing is, if you are working on small character, it's not worth it because you won't see it anyway. If you're working on a bigger character like this one, You can do it, but it still needs to have like a certain size to be visible and not to be like completely washed out by the printer. I don't know if that answers your question. Does humidity affect your hair? Actually, yeah. When I was living in the Caribbean, I had more, I mean, curlier hair than right now, and plus I'm getting old, so my hair is getting affected by that. But yeah, humidity definitely affects my hair. Do these printing setups work for filament or liquid printing or both? Sorry, Gilles, I don't really know, to be honest. I know about the creating stuff, but not really about the printing, to be fair. So Hutz, I have a question here though. When I post stuff with the T-post, sometimes it gets messed up, especially stuff that has wrinkle and hard surface stuff. So do you avoid that with polygrouping each and every object? Um, can you maybe define what you mean like messed up? If it's like it's completely broken, like the points are doing, I don't know, it's doing mess stuff. This is like more of a ZBrush fucking up and not recognizing that this point go there and go there over there. But yeah, polygrouping can usually can usually help like just isolating area, but I think you have to enable the polygrouping when you are doing the transpose master. If I remember correctly, you have to go inside transpose master, and then if you click on groups, it will preserve the polygroup that you might have on your model. So joints gets messy and some muscle get elongated, hard surface acts organic. So okay, for that thing, some stuff will get deformed by the stuff you're doing. So yeah, having polygroups there can help like masking out some areas. Um, yeah, so basically I do it with polygroups. I hope this answered your question. Otherwise, you can, of course, ask me a question later. I will always answer them. Which was until now your most challenging project? I think it was this one, the Ammut, because it was a mix between big creature, different anatomy, not styles, but different animals in terms of anatomy. There was armors, there was so hard surface, there was um, cloth, and the pose is also like not super dynamic, but with all the stuff happening on the sculpt, like all the armor, it was like super hard to pose all the armor. But actually, now that I think about it, it wasn't as hard. But sorry, working on the vampire was also a bit annoying because all of the armor parts, so it was long just to pose everything. How do you find the balance in the detail of the sculpt so you have enough detail for a large print, but not too much so it's messy in a smaller print? Um, like I said, for the bigger prints, you can usually go nuts. If it's higher than 100 millimeters, it probably will show the details. So if you put them, uh, I mean they will show up. All the smaller prints, basically just don't do them. Don't do the tertiary like details, and you shouldn't have any problem. I know that the primary and secondary shape, like all the big masses and all the meat details will show up. I like to do more details, like more scratches and more like basically details on the armors of smaller characters. But this is not for the client. It's more for me when I'm going to showcase it on ArtStation. They will show up because I can show the model from close. But just knowing that you are gonna work on a smaller character, you could just not do them basically, and just keep it at the primary and secondary shapes. How do you keep the hair on a character like this manageable? As someone with less character experience is searching a lot of different meshes, seems like it might get messy to organize down the line. So I was wondering how you would usually go about tackling such a complex cluster during sculpting. When I worked on this character, I hold on. Why can't I? Okay. When I worked on it, it was like in T-pose, like this. So when I started posing the hair, it wasn't like too much of a challenge. It was basically easy, like how you would pose hair and stuff like that. The thing is, when, like you said, you start moving stuff around, it might get messy, uh, but then you can't do very much about it. So either you pose it like this in T-pose, and it saves you a lot of time because you're doing it in symmetry and just sometimes breaking the symmetry on top of it just to make it look more believable. It will save you time on that side, but on the other hand, when you're gonna pose it, it's going to deform because this is not organic, but it's soft. It's not like an armor or something like a rock or basically something hard surface, I would say. So you should either go do it in T-pose and save some time on the sculpting and have it messed up when you're gonna pose it, or you could actually do it after you pose the character, and then you have more control on on the hair flow. But in that case, you would have like to sculpt everything strand by strand because you can't have the symmetry on for that stuff. So what I usually do is I do it in T-pose and I try to then polish and fix it or even rework it when I'm done with the pose. Like I put new strands to maybe hide the problem or stuff like that. But you could actually see it if you look at the bottom of the head. There are like some strands that are a bit more like wider and I mean the shape is unnatural compared to the one on the top that didn't move, and it's basically this. I didn't like fix that because it wasn't like too noticeable. But you might have problem like that, and just going back and fixing it by hand could do the trick. Uh, what's the most ridic uh, ridiculously, sorry for my English, high poly thing you've ever worked on? It's either this one or one of the horsemen of the apocalypse. It was like 150 million points inside Zbrush, but it's definitely either this one or the other ones. Doesn't using individual meshes for hair like the brush you used make it very heavy on the poly count very fast? That is true, but if you have a good work PC, it won't matter because you can still decimate it afterwards and export it to the 3D printer. So, I mean, you gotta like have to go with it and hope your PC doesn't crash. Are sculpts for printing more enjoyable to work on than something for a game? If so, why? I would say yes, because even though you focus on some technical aspect that you have to keep in mind when you are doing a 3D print, you don't have all the technical, I would say, bullshit that you need to go through to make a game ready character live, I would say. Because if you are doing a game ready character, you have to do the high poly, the low poly. When you do the low poly, you have to do the retopo, the UV, you have to bake, you have to do the texturing, then you have to do the lighting, and then you have to pose it and even do the skinning, the rigging. Um, I mean, you know what I'm saying. And on the other hand, when you are doing a character for 3D printing, you can just focus on making the character look good and just having fun artistically, I would say, and not worrying about, oh shit, how am I gonna do this in the texture? Oh shit, should I do this as an alpha or should I use like real hair strands? How many texture do I need? How many? I don't know. What's the poly count I should reach? That kind of stuff. So I actually prefer working on stuff like that because it's just sculpting, and ZBrush is the best software in the universe, and I will smite anyone who says the opposite. So like Turk, for example. Uh, oh, that's not the last question. Kaz is not my wife. Yeah, it was anyway the last question from Cam. Um, um, I think we all want to ask you this, but when can we expect a sculpt of yourself? Bruh, I don't know. Never, I guess. Unless someone wants to do it. Please stop putting emojis on this. Okay,
I
okay.
can pay you, Doc. I can pay
Oh,
you.
holy shit. Okay, eventually I will make one. Like, when I will make the tutorial for EXP, maybe I'll do a sculpt of myself. And, and thank you, Gilles, for organizing everything and making all this possible. Please, yes, you are created the universe and everything. But please, everyone, be sure to thank Gilles for all his hard work and all the EXP team for what they did. It was really, really amazing. I mean, I really loved that EXP Expo, which is the first one, and hopefully it will be one of many. But thank you everyone for coming, and thank you everyone who made it happen. I love you all.